Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. My guest tonight is Congresswoman Bella Abzug. Since 1971, Bella has fought for the rights of underrepresented Americans with a style that prompted one conservative colleague to characterize her as the only man in the House. She describes herself as a radical and an activist. Bella, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Did it bother you to be called the only man in the House?
Well, I really don't pay too much attention to those things. Change is hard to come by.
Bella, if you had to give a course for women to help them get into politics, what would be some of the things that you think would be required?
Well, I think that most women have to feel that they have an interest in really creating some change. I mean, it's a very serious business being in the political arena, and we have had so much bad in the political arena out of a structure that's been dominated by a very elitist grouping of males, that we want women to come in who really stand for social change. We want women to come in who really are committed not only to eliminate discrimination against a person because of sex. We want women to come in who are fighting for their own equality within the framework of a different kind of society, society which fights poverty, a society which fights racism, a society which fights militarism, a society that wants to put the vast resources of this great democracy, its economic resources, its great cultural and constitutional history to work for a greater economic and political and social equality. It hasn't been that way for almost 200 years, and those of us in the National Women's Political Caucus, particularly myself, who has been one of the promoters and sponsors of women running for political office, believes that before we reach our 200th birthday, or as we reach it, that it's time we completed the American Revolution. And an important and integral part of that is to recognize a very simple fact, that the women who come into politics have to do it differently. They have to really have a commitment, not to a machine, not to a special interest, not even to a career, although it's okay to like your career, but to the representation of the diverse people that we've got, men and women, to fight for yourself, yes, as a woman, but to fight for all of your people. So first you have to be prepared to conduct that intensive battle for social change, for yourself and for the society itself, for a more fair distribution of power and a more fair distribution of the economic resources.
You once said that Congress reeks of sameness. What did you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the Congress, it doesn't look like the country. I mean, you just have to walk in to the House of Representatives. It's 435 people, and only 16 are women. Now, that doesn't look like the country. We're more than half of us women. At the time I came in, and that's changing, I'm glad to say, the age level was pretty much above 50. That's changing. There are also a few minorities of all kinds. That should also change. If you go into the Senate at this particular moment, there are no women there. It's a no woman's land. Or as I and others have said, it's a stag Senate, and that means a stagnation. So it's time that we change that so that we can really say, look, our Congress looks like the people, and it's more like America, and it might then begin to act for the needs of the ordinary Americans, which is the majority of us, instead of for the special interests that have for so long dominated the political structures, as has been evidenced by the revelations of Watergate.
In your book, you speculate, and I thought it was great, about what the country might be like if women had been represented properly all along.
I think it's hard to believe that if women had been in the Congress of the United States, that we would have conducted an illegal, immoral war in Vietnam for as long as we did. I think it's unreal to believe that if women were in greater numbers in the Congress, that we would not have by now enacted child care legislation for the more than 38% of the women who work in this country. I think that if you read the Pentagon Papers, which document the illegalities of the Vietnam War, there is no name of any woman Watergate and its role of characters or cast of characters has no women in it except as victims. I mean, a secretary, a wife, always is a victim. The decision-making, in a sense, has been very male and very unoriented towards the humanity and the compassion that a great country like ours should really have. I believe that what is missing in the political arena, not only in this legislative body, the Congress, is compassion, is caring, is wanting and hoping and believing. For too long, it's been a very static political structure, both the Congress, the state houses, very often the city halls, and the political parties. And I think it's because it's been unnatural. It's not natural to have just men in these places. Every other place we have men and women. So what it does is take on a certain formality and a certain rigidity, a certain style, a certain exclusivity, a certain callousness and coldness. And we can try to change that. Women have in their heads something different because of what we have sort of been subjected to having in our heads. We are supposed to be the more gentle, the more recessive, and the more caring. And many of us are, most of us are. Also, a good number of us are that way because we've been involved with the business of childbearing. You know, I have two lovely daughters, and I want them to have a beautiful atmosphere as I'm developing their lives as they're growing up. And so I'm more concerned with the fabric of society and the fabric of the community, and I think the fabric of the nation. In any case, the nation now perceives correctly that women can make a difference. Men and women both perceive that men, having made such a mess of things, we will be called upon, and are being called upon, in a certain traditional way, interestingly enough, to clean up the mess, and we hope to do that. So you have to be prepared to fight for social change. You have to be prepared to clean up the mess. So that's an old role we've had. You have to be prepared to work very hard. Women are challenged in the political arena, and most of us who are there now, I think, are among the most hardworking. I would say that of my acquaintances with the women both in the Congress and in the state legislatures throughout this country and in the city legislatures, we have some of the most talented women, some of the most creative legislators and human beings. I would hope that we would continue that kind of person in office where women are concerned. I'm not talking about supporting women who have backward views or reactionary views. I think we have enough of those in the Congress now. I'm talking about people and women who will come out of an ideology, a knowledge of themselves, wanting to create this equality for themselves in a society that has a soul and a society that wants to provide much more for all of its people rather than for the voracious military, for the Pentagon, for the top of the corporate ladder, and the special interests who have had the money to buy power. We don't want that. We want women to also be prepared to go out and fight for campaign reform, public financing, so that they can come from the people. We want to give a little bit of idealism, at the same time some realism to the political arena.
Then you don't think we should vote for women just because they're women?
No, I never, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I made that very clear when we first formed the National Political Caucus. I, for one, felt that the caucus had to be based upon ideas, that we wanted to create, we wanted women to change power. We don't want to substitute an elitist, dominated, white, all-male, middle-class power structure that for a woman's power structure which looks like that. We want to make it different. We want to change things. We want to make a difference in this country and in the world. It's about time.
You said that a way to change Congress, to make it respond to our needs, is to show it for what it is, and you really did that in your book. Were you very shocked when you first went to Washington and discovered?
Well, the book that you speak of course, was written in my first year of Congress, and it was, so to speak, a documentary of my thoughts and my actions.
A diary, right?
A diary. Since that time, yes, of course I was shocked, but it's interesting. Right at this time, the Congress is dealing with this unpardonable pardon of Mr. Ford's, which I believe to be illegal in the first place, which I believe to be have come about as a result of some prearrangements. I disagree with it. I think it should be challenged in the courts. And I brought on a resolution of inquiry directed to the President asking 10 or more questions concerning that pardon, which came before the Judiciary Committee. Now, the interesting thing is when I came to the Congress, I was shocked at one thing, that I wasn't able to get any information from the executive branch of government. And I said, this is impossible. By the time you get a resolution in the hopper to a committee and hearings had and action on the floor, why, it's the end of a year or more. And I've got to have some information. And so I conducted a line of research very much consistent with what I knew to be the parliamentary system, at least in England, which was that the Prime Minister came down to the Parliament and could be asked questions by the members of Parliament. And I found this resolution of inquiry, which hadn't been used in 24 years, which is a resolution of questioning facts, can be directed only to a president or a cabinet secretary, and I've been using it from time to time in the Congress. It's a privileged resolution that can be called up to the floor for a vote in 7 days. Now, the interesting thing is that I found the lack of information available almost startling from the executive branch. I used it for the Pentagon Papers, the Indo-Chinese War, agreements of cooperation in the Middle East, and so on, and finally with the fourth thing. So that was one of the things that I've been trying to pierce, opening up the process. It's not only enough to open it up to women to come in, but open it up to the people so that they have a right to know. God knows that was the meaning of what went on with the whole impeachment thing. There was a cover-up, and the people had a right to know. And having been an early, proponent of impeachment, I felt that the right to know was very deeply involved in the question of the Watergate and its cover-up. So those were some of the things. And then I was shocked to find out that there was very little legislation affecting women being put into the hopper. It's true, I was there at the time of the Equal Rights Amendment passage, and I fought very hard for that, along with others, in and out of Congress. But I couldn't get over the fact, for example, that there was no law on the books or even a bill having been introduced which would eliminate discrimination against women in credit. Women were discriminated against in credit, in terms of credit cards, getting mortgages, business loans and bank loans. And so I testified before a national commission that was inquiring on the issue of credit, headed by another congresswoman who'd been there for quite a while and been doing an interesting job, Lenore Sullivan. And then I looked around and saw there was no bill, and I introduced one. And that was picked up by somebody in the Senate, Senator Brock, and it was just passed and made a law this year in the Congress of the United States. So it only took about 3 years, but I think that having started it, and having started with zero, it was quite something.
You could go wild proposing all kinds of legislation.
Well, we do propose quite a bit, and I do have quite a bit of legislation affecting equality and the rights of women.
Give us some examples.
Well, there's a very important bill which is already passed the committee in the Senate. The counterpart in the Senate is by Mr. Tunney, which is a flexible hours bill, which would start out with federal civil servants in employment and provide for at least in over a 5-year period that 10% of the federal civil service jobs should be made available for people to work on in irregular hours. That's a particularly important thing for women. The whole question of having to work from 9 to 5, particularly those who have families, are very tough.
So 2 women could share a full-time job?
All kinds of things like that could be done, and we hope that that will be passed very shortly. Patsy Mink had a very important piece of legislation passed, Women's Educational Equality Act, which is going to deal with the inequalities in education, the stereotypes, and so on. I got an amendment passed to the pension reform bill, which increases the eligibility of women at earlier age and so on. I have attached to all the bills that I've had anything to do with in my Public Works Committee, whether it's a mass transit bill, which I've had a great deal of involvement with in this last session, or a water resources bill, or a water pollution bill, or economic development bill, amendments against the discrimination of women in those jobs. Because although the Civil Rights Act does provide for provisions in which prevent discrimination against women on account of sex, Title VI does not. And until that's amended, we have to have these additional amendments on specific pieces of legislation. I'm particularly interested in the woman who has spent most of her life working, not in the factory, not in the field, not in an office, but in the home. Because people mistake what our struggle for equality is. It's for all women, women in the home, women out of the home, women who have the right, yes, to choose to leave the home and work if they wish, but there are many women who work. And
that was your amendment to the Social Security Act?
Yeah, well, yeah. As I have often said, I'm very indebted to Chase Manhattan, as if everybody isn't. But I mean, for a pamphlet they put out, which is called What's a Wife Worth, in which they list all the occupations of women who stay at home, you know, laundress and chauffeur and cook and cleaner and the babysitter and cab driver and whatnot. And estimate that the woman is worth, in a salary, roughly $8,500 a year. Ann Scott of now has estimated that worth of being about $13,000. In any case, she doesn't get paid. If she's lucky, she gets a little allowance like a child, huh? But I think that certainly when she faces an age in which her, you know, years have gone by and she's put in all this labor, that she should be able to get Social Security in her own right. So I have proposed a homemaker's benefit, which has got a long way to go in the Congress, because it will require, you know, funding at the moment of general revenues. We all have some disagreements as to how it should be funded. But a woman shouldn't have to be dependent upon either a husband, if she has one, or for a benefit. She should be able to get it in her own right. As a matter of fact, we need to make more equal the laws affecting Social Security and taxes and so on, where women are concerned much more than they are.
What about
right now.
Divorced women? There's some inequity there, isn't there?
Yes, there is a lot of inequity, and we're trying to provide that she doesn't have to be divorced 20 years before she gets certain benefits. We're trying to lower that to 5 years, and things of that kind. There's generally a disregard for the single woman, the woman who's the head of the family, in the laws as we have it on the books, in every form, and we've got to try to change that. And we have many pieces of legislation which are there for that purpose.
Bella, many women are very concerned about the abortion
Amendments.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, we've had several. In other words, those people, when they represent, I think, a minority view in the country among all religious groups, Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, Episcopalian, and so on, but they're very vocal. There's been an effort to reverse the Supreme Court decision, which said that it's a matter of choice. A woman has a right to abortion under the 1st, 5th, 9th, 14th Amendments as a matter of privacy, by not getting a reversal of the decision, because they really can't. As a matter of fact, just the other day, there was another decision of the Supreme Court which made one of the amendments that was passed in the House unconstitutional. So what people have been trying to do is conduct an end run around the Supreme Court decision, which guarantees a fundamental right, by simply attaching to various other pieces of legislation prohibitions against using funds for either counseling or abortion or even birth control. Some of them have gone quite far. We've beaten back a couple of them very heftily, but there were a couple attached with, concerning funds for a hospital and the hospital construction bill. That's the one the Supreme Court, I think, the other day has changed, which said that, you know, a hospital, if it didn't, as a condition of getting funds, have to make abortion available, even though it is the law of the land. Well, there was a recent case that just came up. The Supreme Court said that a state could not prohibit abortion, and they would have to make this abortion available in the hospitals. So that one, which was passed, I think, is now knocked out of the box. There's something about utilizing the funds for family planning and so on, not being able to be used for abortion advice or abortions in the Foreign Assistance Acts, which I think will not stand up. And there's now one that's still in committee, which we defeated in the House, but which the Senate attached to the HEW appropriations. The funds therein could not be used for abortions, and I think it's subject to attack on many constitutional grounds, and I'm hopeful that the conferees in conference will reject it. What it's all about is this: you have a right of choice, and I don't think that those who have a different point of view, whether it's out of a religious conviction or even one of conscience, should seek to impose their view, which is a minority view, through the legislative process on the rest of the country. you don't have to have an abortion if you disapprove of it, and that's correct. At the same time, you have no right to deprive somebody else of that right. That's essentially what the Supreme Court is saying, and that's the strength of this country, the freedom of choice. And I think that's how it has to be. It has to provide for that. It's really also somewhat hypocritical because there are at least 1 million abortions a year, and it's not a question of whether to have abortions, or it's just a matter of how to make sure that they take place in a safe way, in a way in which people are not humiliated or physically maimed by the old, abortion quack. Also, most of these laws in the Congress are going to, if they continue, these efforts to amend existing laws and not allow funds, which normally would provide funds, whether it's for Medicaid and other areas of funding, which would involve abortion counseling, really discriminate against poor people, because anybody who has any money has always been able to get an abortion. So they have another extra sting to their effort to take away the rights, because essentially it would have taking away the rights of poor people, and that really is too much.
Billy, you have a 100% pro-labor voting record.
Yes.
And you don't always get support from labor, and other women candidates don't either. What's that work there? How do you explain that?
Well, it's very tough. I did get the support of the state AFL-CIO, which means all of labor this time around. This is my third time around, but it took until this time to get it. I not only have a 100% labor record, but I'm probably one of the most pro-labor, among the most pro-labor in the Congress, having once been a lawyer before I came to Congress representing unions. So it's a lifetime commitment. Well, it's part of the male domination of our institutions. It's not only political. Women are not the heads of the unions, even though they are very often the majority of the membership. And labor plays, as you know, an important political role, just as our political parties do not back up women running for office with money or support and endorsement, neither do the labor unions. They're all in the business of making kings, but not queens. They actually do not seem to wish to share power with women, or are not yet fully prepared to accept women in leadership. However, I think changes are taking place. The AFL-CIO's support of the Equal Rights Amendment, I believe, will go far in helping to get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified. There were some women in this last election who did get endorsement and support financial from unions. Not enough. There are a lot of places where if the women had gotten initial support and endorsement and funding from unions, as well as from the party, as well as from other do-good groups like the Committee for an Effective Congress and others that give funding to candidates, we would have had more women running on the national levels. Of course, a lot of women ran on local and state levels and got elected. That takes less money, less support. It's easier to deal with. And these are, of course, the future mayors and governors and members of Congress for 76 and 78. And so I suspect that labor is going to have to come along. When we say labor, it isn't everybody. There's some leadership that still has some resistance to change. I guess they feel that way. They feel that women are identifiable with change. We're conducting a struggle right now in the Democratic Party, our great party, which has had such marvelous reforms in 68 and 72, so that where we had 13% women at the Democratic Convention in 68, we had upwards of 40% in 72 as a result of reforms. Now, some people are trying to turn those reforms back, even though as a result of two excellent committees, the Mikulski Committee and the Charter Commission, there was agreement reached through compromise in our party as to how we maintain these reforms to make sure that the party remains open in all of its affairs to women, young people, minorities, and that we encourage them. We're having a little mini convention in December, at which this issue will be brought up, and we in the women's movement are organizing all of the delegates as well as the elected officials and those who are in the party to support the reforms brought out
Who are
in
some
compromise.
of the other women working with you?
Well, the National Women's Political Caucus. The National Democratic Committee has its own caucus of women, and the National Women's Political Caucus, the Democrats ended up working on that, and we have a committee set up there of Corinne Horble, who heads that committee, and Pat Darian of Mississippi, and Phyllis Siegel, who is on the affirmative action delegation of the Mikulski Commission, myself. We're working on it very hard.
Bella, some of the people who are sort of critical of women say that it took them a long time to get the vote and they're still not using it right.
Well, we're using it now. Come. It's true, it took us all these years to use it. We've been using it until now only to elect men. Do you know that there is no political party, no election campaign, no political event in the United States that could take place without the hard, back-breaking work of women? Now we've told differently. We ran State Senator Marianne Krupsek in my great state of New York against the party. The liberals and the regulars in the party did not want to support her and did not nominate her. Neither of the gubernatorial candidates that were running against each other would accept her. I fought for her at each of the conventions and with all of the gubernatorial candidates until finally we made it a campaign of women. And I and others went out there and we beat them in the streets and in the primary. So women came out in big numbers, and the polls showed that they voted more for Marianne than did the men, but obviously men and women voted for her. The same thing is seen in the projection of the candidacy of Ella Grasso, the governor of Connecticut, and in the candidacy of Betty Roberts and for the Senate in Oregon and so on. Women are using their vote for women, but men are also voting for women. They think women are going to bring a new decency into politics, and that's what they're for. Now, it's taken us a little time to convince women, who after all are the products of our society, to accept women in leadership. You know, it's like women always used to be afraid to go to women doctors, right? Now they prefer them because they've learned that there's a greater understanding of women given by women. We want women DAs in rape cases because otherwise rape cases are not properly prosecuted. We want women...
Bella, we have 30 seconds. I just want to ask you one more question. The 76 elections will be coming up. Will there be a woman candidate for president?
Well, I really don't know. But I think as we move into 76 and elections after that, we'll stop asking that question. It won't even be a matter of will there be. We will expect men and women.
Bella, thank you very
Depending on
much
their
for being
ability.
here tonight. Thank you for watching, and good night.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.